Welcome to federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm your host, Larry Allen. Today, as we talk about safeguarding government employees, as federal employees travel more and increasingly work from home, providing for the physical, technical, and indeed all types of security for federal employees is tremendously important. With me to talk about safeguarding government employees today is Jim Lucier. Jim is Chief Customer Officer at Concur. Jim, welcome to the segment.
Thank you so much, Larry. Great to be here.
Jim, let's talk about the landscape for a second. The landscape of our global environment can change at a moment's notice. How does that impact government employees as they work to fulfill government missions? The employee view, for example. Likewise, how does that employee view translate into challenges that government agencies themselves face in safeguarding their employees from a collective standpoint?
It's a great couple questions, Larry. And, we've had the privilege of working with the federal government in its travel program for over 4 years now. So we have a fair amount of experience with this sort of thing. When we first got into working with the government, we really wanted to drive a lot of cost savings for the government. We wanted to improve a number of the processes that they have. And ultimately, we wanted to delight the government traveler, to make things much easier on the government traveler. And although I hope you haven't seen, if you have seen the federal travel regulations and the joint travel regulations, these are books that would make an encyclopedia blush. They're so big. And when you layer on top of that individual interpretations by government agencies, you get a very, very complex structure. But we weren't daunted by that because we've been actually working with commercial travel and expense customers for over 20 years. And it was almost 9 years to the day that we released the first integrated travel and expense product. And what that did was it recognized that booking travel and filing an expense report or voucher were not, in fact, two different processes, but they were part of the same process. And as you see that they're part of the same process and you let the data follow you the whole way, an enormous number of benefits accrue to agencies. The benefits are it's much easier for the individual to use it since it's the same bit of data. And of course, from a procurement and finance perspective, millions of dollars can be unleashed in cost savings. The question, though, since Concur has innovation in its blood, really, is what are we doing next from an innovation standpoint? And there are two macro trends here that I'd like to address for a moment. The first is that in each of our pockets now, we have a very powerful personal computer in many ways in our mobile phone. And we get to choose what's on our mobile phone, and even places where the organization dictates what phone you'll use, most people will get their own phone. And what do they do with that phone? They put tools on that phone that help them do their jobs, and they get to choose it. And from the perspective of an enterprise application company like Concur, this is a very, very powerful trend. No longer do we worry about just procurement departments, finance departments, and IT departments as our customers. We have to think of all of our users as customers. And that focus allowed us to really work on initiatives related to travel that we call the perfect trip, the expense report or voucher that writes itself, and the effortless invoice. And all that is reflected in this first major trend of mobility. And it's even more poignant in travel. When you think about travel, there is nothing more mobile than travel. And so we've developed a suite of apps that many, many government customers use as well as commercial customers use to do things like be notified promptly of a gate change or a delayed flight, to approve expense reports, to approve travel, do all of those kinds of things right from their mobile phone. And that's one major slice of innovation that's going on. The second one that I alluded to is actually coming from the travel industry. And after Concur released integrated travel and expense and very powerful reporting was released, all of a sudden, people squeezed everything they could have out of the supply chain, and travel managers started to realize the criticality of business travel. And this is even more important in the government than it is commercially, because you think about government travel, it is almost all mission related, many of it national security related. So we really wanted to focus on how do we make sure that when traveling, employees actually are equipped to do their job. And so the focus became less on cost savings, and the focus became more on how do we delight travelers as we go. And that's a broad travel management trend. At the intersection of these two trends is something we call duty of care.
So, Jim, let me stop you right there and pause for a minute because I want to focus more on the phrase you just used, and that phrase is duty of care. Duty of care really sounds like it lies at the nexus of all the things that Concur provides for its federal customers. Can you give us a little bit more detail and background on what duty of care really is all about?
Yeah, I think you said it really well there, Larry. Duty of care is truly at the intersection of these two macro trends we talked about, the one being mobility and the other being the empowerment of the traveler. And the concept here is really quite simple for duty of care. It means that an organization has a legal and or moral responsibility to safeguard travelers while they're on official business. Traditionally, this has been done by organizations called either travel management companies or TMCs, or in the defense world, commercial travel organizations or CTOs. But of course, the approach of calling your travel agent and asking who is in what city on any given day has got a bunch of drawbacks, doesn't it? First and foremost, many people book travel outside of an official capacity, and so the travel agency may not even know where they are. The second, of course, is that there are many people who are on local travel that the travel agency doesn't know anything about. And then the final part is that in really looking to safeguard employees, knowing that they are in a place is not the same thing as knowing that they are okay. And so this becomes a very natural application for mobility again, where you can actually have a two-way dialogue with your employee to understand whether they are safe, and if they are not, what kind of help do they need, and get them that help. A couple of examples for you. We have a very prominent university customer who, during the Paris subway attacks of last year, had 14 people that were affiliated with the university in Paris. And they were able to communicate via text on the mobile phone with all 14 of them and find out that they were okay and, in fact, did not need help. And so there was a great sense of relief, obviously, within the university. But one of the interesting things that happened as a result of that was that all 14 people were really thrilled that the university cared enough about them to reach out. And I thought that was an interesting story. More personally, 6 years ago, I was in Paris when the volcano erupted over Iceland and grounded European air travel. And while you may suggest there are worse places to be than Paris, you know, my issue was I had left for a business trip less than 2 weeks after my second child was born, which was not a smart decision, but it got a lot dumber when I was grounded for a week. This is a great example of an opportunity that if we'd had risk messaging at the time within Concur, we could have gathered all of our employees, communicated with them, understood where they were, and gotten them out of Europe broadly much more quickly. And in fact, we had one commercial customer who was using it, who had a number of employees there, and they did. They communicated with all their employees. They put the employees on, he got them cars and drove them to Madrid where they were able to fly out. So there are applications for risk messaging that go well beyond just the immediacy of there's an environmental and or enemy action type of disaster.
So, Jim, what your answer there really gets to is the importance of taking care of the individual over the agency. Tell me a little bit about how important it is for Concur to provide the right types of solutions with the correct timing.
Concur's risk messaging for government improves the safety of government employees with the right solution, the right intelligence, at the right time, with the right communications, so government agencies can meet their duty of care responsibilities.
So clearly a lot of applications to the Concur solution, some that we might not think of in everyday business. We're going to pause here for a short break. My guest is Jim Lucier. Jim is Chief Customer Officer at Concur. You're listening to On Safeguarding Government Employees, sponsored by Concur. I'm your host, Larry Allen, and you're listening to federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.